The last emperor of China, or Puyi, once said, "The forbidden state has become theater without an audience." So why did the actors remain on stage? Hello, this is me, Dr. Venice, and today we are going to talk about the Qing. Most history enthusiasts do not really know much about the history of the Qing. Most people just know the Qing for the Opium Wars, but it is really important to understand Qing China and its downfall to understand modern China. A very strange thing about the Qing was that they weren't technically Chinese. The Ming dynasty was invaded by the Manchus, which were based in Manchuria. This brought good things. First, it made minorities like the Tibetans happy. They also introduced imperial testing, which allowed people to climb the ladder easier. Also, the Qing had the mandate of heaven on their side. However, it also caused tension because of the Han population and, being conquered. They also forced all of the Han to adopt their hairstyle to Q, and nobody wants this goofy haircut, so people obviously revolted. So instead of just agreeing with them, yeah, their haircut looks kind of stupid, they massacred them. The Manchus, who took over, brought in their military system, known as the Four Banner System. The system was created when the Nurachi united the Manchus, and to shortly summarize, every household was sworn to a company, and every company was sworn to a different banner. At first, there were 4 colored banners: yellow, white, red, and blue. But then, while uniting Manchuria, they were more creative by adding a different colored border. This system was also the inspiration for the Qing Empire flag, which was the banner army that Nurachi led, the yellow one. And after invading the Ming, there were banners created for the Chinese and the Mongols. But the banner system was not just military, it was also a very important aspect of life, because bannermen were essentially nobles, like the samurai in Japan. But the ethnicity aspect in the banner system was very complex as well, which is a very big part of the banner system. Some Han became more Manchu, and some Manchu became more Chinese. And some Manchu adopted Han children, and some Han adopted Manchu children, which really complicated the system. Another flaw was that the Manchu population, which were above the Han, were way too small of a population to be the only ruling ethnicity, which is why the Qing dynasty is known as a Chinese dynasty, because most of the population was Chinese. This also made the Chinese rise up to power, making the Manchus some minority. But surprisingly, in the 17th century, their system was pretty successful. There was also the Green Standard Army, which is a sort of military police that handled Ming loyalist rebellions in the south. After the Ming loyalists were crushed on the mainland, they fled to the island of Taiwan. Sound familiar? The only difference is that they didn't survive very long. But how come Taiwan didn't fall faster today? Well, it's simple diplomacy. China's economy is purely based on trade, and if the invasion of Taiwan happens, they'll be sanctioned, and it will basically be suicide to launch an invasion. After the suppression of the Ming Rebellion, the Emperor Kangxi has brought many guards to the Qing, conquering Mongolia and Tibet. They also started a war with the Dzungars. However, they also did some terrible things. Not morally, though. It was not like there was a massacre. They started a coastal ban. The Ming made an isolation policy, which didn't allow the production of boats, which will backfire in the future a lot. But the Qing, fearing the Ming loyalists rising up again, made it so that people couldn't live on the coast, or 25 kilometers off the coast. This enactment was also called the Great Clearance. This prohibited any trade, turning money power hubs into ruins. After this, they launched another campaign against the Dzungars, which used half of the treasury. The Emperor, Yangxiang, was also a cosplayer, dressing up as the Dalai Lama and a European fighting in lion. After the death of Yangxiang, he was succeeded by Xianglin Long, who conquered the Kosher Mongols and the Dzungars. But while, quote-unquote, pacifying the region, they committed a genocide of 450,000 individuals, or 80% of the population. But long before the century of humiliation, or the 19th century, there were many revolts, which were mostly ethnic and religious, like in conquered territories of Tibet and Dzungar. And now, one of my favorite topics on the Qing dynasty, secret societies. That's right, China had many secret societies. You can't even name all of them, including one known as the Shaolin monks, which are basically Buddhist monk ninjas. But secret societies don't stop there. They'll continue for all of Qing China's history. Another very important society is the White Lotus Society, which will cause a very important rebellion, which will end the Qing dynasty's golden age, and basically start the century of humiliation. During this rebellion, the Qing realized their war machine was not as powerful as they thought it was, and would become the laughingstock of the world. But the White Lotus did more than that. They were a very old society, starting during the Yuan Mongol dynasty, and also starting the Red Turban Rebellion, which will also be highly detrimental to the Qing. The banner army system also proved to be inefficient, making the bannermen very important and strong in the politics of the Qing dynasty, which is also a problem with the Ottomans, making Janissaries have strong political ties in the Ottoman government. The same would go to the Green Standard Army, which is also very useless. So the Qing just became geniuses. They saw how terrible their soldiers were and brought back horses and bows. And when their neighbor Russia started to use guns while hunting, they got mad and demanded them to stop using guns and return to bow. After that, James Flint, wanting to make a better place to trade, since the one that was required had traffic, went to Tianjin to talk with the emperor to be allowed to trade in a different region. The Qing, being very sensible, said no and restricted trade entirely. But after a while, the Qing realized it's a pretty goofy idea and allowed trade again. So the East India Company started selling opium to the Qing, making everybody high. This also brought Christianity in the south, which will be a pretty big problem in the future. Back to opium, Lin Zexu has tried to ban opium, burning it into fires, and there are no official records of this, but I think after he did that, and the people around him became stoners. And because of the restriction of trading opium, the first opium war broke out. China could have supported 800,000 individuals for the war, 200,000 of which would have muskets. But the government was so stoned on opium, they just said, nah, let's just do 100,000. And even those 100,000 people weren't ready. While the Brits had about 5,000 soldiers and about 10,000 Marines. This might seem like the British are outnumbered, but the Brits had very good veteran soldiers and better tech. And China had never fought an international war, so they were also very bad at fighting. Also, the banner system that the Qing had strongly divided the army, which made the Qing have multiple small armies that acted on their own instead of one huge group. But then the Sikh Empire declared war on the Chinese, and China had to make peace with the British. The British won, making China give Hong Kong and also getting rid of the Cantonese system. And then Christianity started to spread even more, and one of those converts were Hong Jishuan. He claimed to be the brother of Jesus, launching the Taiping Rebellion. This rebellion was one of the biggest wars in history. For comparison, World War II had about 50 million deaths, while the Taiping Rebellion had 20 million. That is about half the death count for World War II. During this chaos, the Qing saw a boat and seized it, but since the ship belonged to the British, the Second Opium War started. The British were joined by the French and the Americans, and unsurprisingly, the Chinese were beaten. They were forced to pay reparations and expanded the territory of Britain, or Hong Kong, in China. But one important treaty that happened was between the Russians, which took half of Manchuria. After this, the Xianfeng Emperor died. The Chongji Emperor succeeded, but the emperor had two dowagers, Cixi and Xian. So they united with Prince Gong and started a coup, which made Cixi the one in power instead of both Xian and Cixi. And Prince Gong made some very important reforms. One of those were the establishment of modern armies, which is a huge problem and humiliation of the Qing. But they did not do this by themselves. They had European military specialists like Charles George Gordon. They also used French and Russian weapons. Some of the elite armies that were made were the Xiang Army, the Peking Field Force, and the ever-victorious army. The Xiang and ever-victorious army, however, would be disbanded, and the White Army would emerge in the place of the Xiang. The Qing also set up actually good naval shipyards. These military reforms helped put down the rebellions in Qing China. But of course, good old Qing will always have some major problem. So they lost control over all of their territories, and the banditries and tomfoolery increased within the country. But it doesn't stop there. No. They fled China, went to Vietnam, and the government had to use guns on elephants to kick them. But how come Japan had much higher success in their reforms than the Qing? And the reason for that is because the Meiji Restoration, or the New World of Japan, had fully ousted the shogun, allowing for much easier reforms. But the Qing still maintained the status quo, and everything was run by the emperor. But some tension was happening between the West and the Qing. The Germans and the Australians believed in the Yellow Terror, while the Qing were mad that the West didn't like their culture and started spreading their religion. In China, they still practiced foot binding, which is something like this. and the West spoke out against that. The Qing didn't really like that. However, Empress Sisi has actually been doing some shenanigans to restore her power, because the palace is currently very corrupted. So at first she lowered Prince Gong's power to advisor, and put more loyal people like Prince Chun in higher power. In the midst of all the rebellions that were happening over the Qing dynasty, what happened in Korea, known as the Donghak Rebellion. The Qing obviously sent troops there, but the Japanese said,
Well, actually, we made a treaty where you can't have troops in this area, so this is a violation of the treaty.
and the first Sino-Japanese war started. And we all know that the Qing are going to lose, but let's talk about why. China might have modernized, but it was hella slow. But they were still using bows and pikes instead of guns. And another problem, which came back through the years, was opium. That's right, the soldiers were still stoned, and they cosplayed as furries to scare away the enemy. And it might not have worked on the Japanese, but it certainly worked on the officers. And can you blame a person for being scared of a furry? Like, I don't want to be in a mile radius within these things. However, some reasons will show up from the first opium war, like the problem that their military is trash and there was high corruption. But since China didn't build the railroads to Manchuria because it didn't want people to immigrate there, the soldiers instead had to go over water and the boats were sunk by the Japanese. This issue also lowered the supplies shipped to the area, which made the troops fight much worse. After the Sino-Japanese War, the European powers just said, we want a piece of China, and they started making plans. And it almost went into action, but one man named John Hay who said, let's just force them to be more free with trade instead. And surprisingly, everyone said yes. This made all nations trade equally with the Qing, which wasn't bad at all compared to what was going to happen. After this miracle, China started making military reforms again, which would help put a central command before the army, which is something China desperately needed. This army was led by a man named Yuan Shikai, and instead of having the army belong to a government, just like always, it became loyal to Shikai instead. And Sisi, being a bit unhappy, launched a coup again, with people like Ronglu and Prince Da, which also installed anti-foreign sentiment. At first, this might seem like a good thing, that foreign powers were always doing something with China, and this would seem like a boss girl mode for Sisi. But instead, the government was ruled by conservatives, which was less willing to do any reforms. And there was, guess what, another secret society, and it was known as the Fists of Harmony and Justice, or the Boxers, which, just like Sisi and other leaders, hated foreigners, so they allied with them. Instead of hating foreigners and the government, it hates the foreigners and loves the government. And from that made China was to ban the imperial testing, which might seem like she is keeping the government to the monarchy, but this testing system actually caused a lot of corruption. It was very important. After this great reform, Sisi and the prince died. The prince was poisoned by guess who? Good old Sisi. However, there's a good reason for that, because he could have ruined the country and take control. But compared with the person she wanted to rule the country, Puyi, who is literally 4, this is a very stupid move, because either way the same results will happen. This small toddler will get manipulated, and the country will turn to chaos, which is where we will see the collapse of the Qing starting to appear. Then a man who came from Hawaii, Sun Yat-sen, tried to start a revolution, and that started a wave of political chaos and revolutions. Then the government decided it would be a good idea to let people study outside of China. This brought in ideas of anarchism and communism.
I call myself a communist queer because I'm a non-binary, bisexual, polyamorous whore. A queer for the people, done by the people.
Version to be built by the local government. But then, that right was sold off to the foreigners, which honestly is really mind-boggling because of the highly anti-foreign government of the Qing. So obviously, people rebelled, and doing this, a lot of organizations like the Progressive Association and the Literary Society tried to take advantage and started planning. But while they were making a bomb, it exploded, revealing that most of the people who were in the revolution were from the army. So the army got scared, and they took over the local government where they were stationed. This success encouraged even more revolutions. The Toginha took all of South China. Then the north of Mongolia declared independence. But no one really cared because there's nothing there. Tibet also became independent. And surprisingly, the west of China didn't declare independence. That was because of a person named Ma Anyang, who helped the Qing hold down this territory. Then Yuan Shikai, yes, the guy that wanted to take the Qing dynasty, actually did, and became the prime minister of course, he still has to deal with the rebellions. And he didn't. He got took down from power when the rebels took Nanjing. And honestly, I feel kind of sad. I mean, this guy was the original. He wanted to do this at first. He was having malicious plans his whole life. And then he just got took down from power. Just kidding, he'll be in power later. But now the rebels have to choose a new leader to lead this new dynasty. And they chose Sun Yat-sen, the president of the Chinese Republic. They then signed peace, and both sides got a very fair deal. The Qing got southern China back, which was the most important part, and the rebels got a republic. They established the Kuomintang under Song Jiren. The Kuomintang controlled both houses of the government, and all they needed to do was lower the power of Yuan Shikai. But oh no, Song Jiren got assassinated! Who could it be? It was never proven that Yuan planned this killing, but we all know he had to do something with it. So the whole republic fell down and Yuan Shikai formed an autocratic regime. At first, no one really cared because, they always lived under an autocracy. But when the Great War started, Japan joined and took German colonies in China. But Japan also decided to do some trolling. What Japan did is basically say, can we have full control over your country, but not officially? So, I can take stuff from your country and do whatever I want in this country. And Yuan Shikai, out of pure fear, just said, yeah. And that's when the people got pissed. They're like, hey, our leader's a pussy. He took commands from that stupid Japanese-looking dude. Let's kill him. And the friends of Yuan Shikai, like Duan Qiri, said, you know what? He is kind of a pussy. So they created their own political factions. And then Yunnan, a revolution, started by Kai Yi. This began the National Protection War. Then Yuan Shikai died after 90 days of ruling. And Li Yuanhong became the president. Then Duan Qiri got power and helped Li Yonghuang slowly got more power, and then Li himself. After that, chaos ensued, because Li really wanted to participate in World War I, and to convince people to do so, he tried to scare the parliament into joining World War I, so the government was divided between Li and Zhang Jun, who was a monarchist, and Duan Qiri with his army, who were the Republicans. However, Li actually had more popularity than Duan, because Li wanted to restore the monarchy, and most of the people in China like monarchism more than republicanism. So Li and Zhang Jun went to the Forbidden Palace and made Puyi emperor again. So Duan came over there and bombarded the palace. Then Li just gave up and made Feng Guozhang president, and Duan Qiri premier. Duan marched to Beijing, which is where the royalists were located, and overwhelmed them. Then Sun Yat-sen returned and started a revolution again. This was called the Constitutional Protection Movement, and a fun fact about China during the Great War, they never actually fought. Instead, they had many workers help work for the countries, which would still grant them a seat at the peace table. So the soldiers weren't out fighting, they stayed inside. China, just waiting for another revolution to start, which it did. And Duan, of course, led his troops to the revolution to destroy it. There were two problems, of course. The first one was that the president never said he could do so. The second was that he failed miserably. And he did what he did before. He grabbed his troops and forced Feng to make him premier again. Zhang Zhoulin, a friend of Duan, helped him make him premier, and it worked again. But after Feng finished his term, Zhu Xichang came to power, and he was actually kind of a genius. He made Zhang and Duan make their own cliques called the Zhili clique, which supported Zhang, and the Anhui clique, which supported Duan, and made them fight against each other, so they will never start any of their tomfoolery again. The Anhui clique took loans from the Japanese to take down the rebellion in the south, and the people were very mad because the clique took loans from their worst enemy. So they started the May 4th movement, and this was actually a very important movement which united the middle class with the working class. The movement boycotted Japanese goods. The protesters also wanted World War I to continue, so anyone who wanted to sign the Treaty of Versailles was attacked, and this actually worked, and anyone who wanted to sign it was fired. The movement also tore down old buildings and temples because they were that progressive, which kind of sounds like what communist China did. It's because the Cultural Revolution was highly inspired by the May the 4th movement. But Duan didn't care about the major movement in China. He focused more on the fact that Mongolia exists. So even Zhu's system of dividing the two premiers failed. So Duan yet again ignored the president and launched a war on Mongolia because he really wanted Mongolia. And so Mongolia was surprised that someone actually cared about them. They didn't have a big military, and most people didn't like, especially Zhang, because Duan's military was on his borders. So Zhang declared war on him, and because of that, they declared war on him. Duan didn't get to keep Mongolia and had to withdraw his troops. And this war started the warlord period. This included the Anhui clique, the Zhili clique, the Southern Rebellion, Western China, which supported the White Russians. The rest were just different warlords fighting between each other. This also officially ended the Qing Empire and starting the Republic of China. So what did we learn? Why did the Qing fall? Well, there are two answers for that. The first was that the Qing had a huge population spurt, which disorganized the country. It had many famines, which had great instability. The second was the banner system. The banner system made it so the army was strongly divided and not unified, which tanked the Qing military a ton. The third reason is China was just very conservative and wasn't ready for change. They didn't care that Britain won over them with 5,000 troops to 100,000. They didn't care that they lost a war to Japan, who was literally in their sphere of influence for centuries. However, there were lots of other factors. These were the biggest ones. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to sexually harass the subscribe button and molest the like button. In the next video, I'll be talking about the Republic of China.